Hegel's Philosophy of Nature. Time. Paragraph 257. The negativity which relates itself to space as point and develops its determinations within it as line and plane, is, however, also a being for self within the sphere of self-externality. It posits its determination within space, but at the same time in conformity with the sphere of self-externality, and is therefore apparently indifferent to the immobile collaterality of space. Thus posited for itself, this negativity is time. Addition. Space is the immediate determinate being of quantity, in which everything remains subsistent, and even limit has the form of a subsistence. This is its deficiency. Space is a contradiction, for the negation within it disintegrates into indifferent subsistence. As space is merely the negation of itself, its truth is the self-transcendence of its moments. It is precisely the existence of this perpetual self-transcendence which constitutes time. In time, therefore, the point has actuality. Through the generation of difference within it, space ceases to be mere indifference, and through all its changes is no longer paralyzed, but is for itself. This pure quantity as difference existing for itself is that which is implicitly negative, that is time. It is the negation of the negation, or self-relating negation. Negation in space is negation relative to another. In space, therefore, the negative does not yet come into its own. In space, the plane is certainly a negation of the negation, but in its truth it is different from space. The truth of space is time, so that space becomes time. Our transition to time is not subjective. Space itself makes the transition. Space and time are generally taken to be the poles apart. Space is there, and then we also have time. Philosophy calls this also in question. Paragraph 258. Time, as the negative unity of self-externality, is also purely abstract and of an ideal nature. It is the being which, in that it is not, and in that it is not, is. It is intuited becoming. Admittedly, its differences are therefore determined as being simply momentary, in that they immediately sublate themselves in their self-externality, however they are self-external. Remark. Time, like space, is a pure form of sensibility or intuition. It is the insensible factor in sensibility. Like space, however, time does not involve the difference between objectivity and a distinct subjective consciousness. If these determinations were to be applied to space and time, the first would be abstract objectivity, and the second abstract subjectivity. Time is the same principle as the ego equals ego of pure self-consciousness. But as time, this principle, or the simple notion, is still completely external and abstract as mere intuited becoming. It is pure being in itself, as a plain self-production. Time is as continuous as space is, for it is abstract negativity relating itself to itself, and in this abstraction there is as yet no difference of a real nature. It is said that everything arises and passes away in time, and that if one abstracts from everything, that is to say, from the content of time and space, then empty time and empty space will be left. That is, time and space are posited as abstractions of externality and represented as if they were for themselves. But everything does not appear and pass in time. Time itself is this becoming, arising and passing away. It is the abstraction which has being, the chronos which engenders all, and destroys that to which it gives birth. That which is of a real nature is certainly distinguished from time, but is just as essentially identical with time. It is limited, and the other involved in this negation is outside it. Consequently, the determinateness is implicitly external to itself, and is therefore the contradiction of its being. Time itself consists of the abstract and contradiction of this externality, and of the restlessness of this contradiction. That which is finite is transitory and temporal, because unlike the notion, it is not in itself total negativity. It certainly contains negativity as its universal essence, but as it is not adequate to this essence and is one-sided, it relates itself to negativity as to its power. The notion, however, in its really existing identity with itself, as ego equals ego, is in and for itself absolute negativity and freedom, and is consequently not only free from the power of time, but is neither within time nor something temporal. It can be said, on the contrary, that it is the notion which constitutes the power of time, for time is nothing but this negation of externality. Only that which is natural, in that it is finite, is subject to time. That which is true, however, the idea, spirit, is eternal. The notion of eternity should not, however, be grasped negatively as the abstraction of time, and as if it existed outside of time, nor should it be grasped in the sense of its coming after time, for by placing eternity in the future, one turns it into a moment of time. Time does not resemble a container in which everything is, as it were, borne away and swallowed up in the flow of a stream. Time is merely this abstraction of destroying. Things are in time because they are finite. They do not pass away because they are in time, but are themselves that which is temporal. Temporality is their objective determination. It is therefore the process of actual things which constitutes time. And if it can be said that time is omnipotent, it must be added that it is completely impotent. The present makes a tremendous demand, yet as the individual present it is nothing. For even as I pronounce it, its all-excluding pretentiousness dwindles, dissolves, and falls into dust. It is the universality of these present moments which lasts, and the sublatedness of this process of things which does not. Even if things endure, time does not rest, but continues to pass, and it is because of this that it appears to be distinct and independent of things. If we say that time continues to pass, even if things endure forever, we are merely saying that although some things endure, change appears in other things, as for example the course of the sun, so that things still remain in time. The attribution of a gradual change is employed as a last resort, in order to endow things with stillness and permanence. If all stood still, even our thinking, we would be permanent and there would be no time. But all finite things are temporal, as sooner or later they are subject to change, and their permanence is therefore only relative. Absolute timelessness is eternity, which is devoid of natural time, and is therefore to be distinguished from duration. In its notion, time itself is eternal, however, for its notion is neither the present nor any other time, but time as such. Its notion is, like all notion, eternal, and thus also constitutes the absolute present. Eternity will not be, nor has it been. It is. Duration is therefore to be distinguished from eternity, in that it is merely a relative sublation of time. Eternity is, however, infinite, that is to say, not relative, but intro-reflected duration. That which is not in time is without process. The most imperfect, like the most perfect, is not in time and therefore endures. The most imperfect endures because it is an abstract universality, such as space and time itself. The sun, the elements, stones, mountains, inorganic nature in general, as well as works of man, such as pyramids, have a barren duration. That which endures is regarded more highly than that which soon passes. But all blossom, all that is exquisite in living being, dies early. The most perfect also endures, however, not only in the lifeless inorganic universal, but also in the other inherently concrete universal of the genus, the law, the idea, and the spirit. We have to decide whether something is the whole process or merely one moment of it. As law, the universal is also inherently a process, and lives only as process. But it is not part of the process. It is not within the process. It contains its double aspect, and is itself without process. In its phenomenal aspect, law falls within time, because the moments of the notion show themselves as independent, but in their notion the excluded differences reconcile and relate themselves, and are harmoniously reassimilated. The idea or spirit is above time, because it is itself the notion of time. In and for itself is eternal and unbreached by time, because it does not lose itself in its own side of the process. This is not the case with the individual as such, on one side of which is the genus. The finest life is that which completely unites its individuality and the universal into one form. The individual is then not the same as the universal, however, and is therefore one side of the process, or mutability, in accordance with which mortal moments it falls within time. Achilles, the flower of Greek life, and the infinitely powerful personality of Alexander the Great are no more, and only their deeds and influences remain through the world that they have brought into being. Mediocrity endures and finally governs the world. Thought also displays this mediocrity with which it pesters the world about it, and which survives by extinguishing spiritual liveliness and turning it into flat formality. It endures precisely because it rests in untruth, never acquires its right, fails to honor the notion, and never realizes the process of the truth within it.